Battlefield 2025, or whatever you want to call it, Battlefield Next, has had its first playtest, admittedly kind of in a closed beta test environment, alpha test, pre-alpha, but it's obviously leaked. Obviously, when you invite a load of random people to play a game, people are going to leak it, and there's a ton of footage online, and I've watched a bunch of that footage. I've watched Jack Frag's video where he's kind of dissecting that. Strongly recommend it. Go check out Jack Frag's channel to watch that. But I thought I'd just talk for a little bit about what I'm hoping for from this next Battlefield game. Now, it's been no secret that a lot of Call of Duty creators, me included, have been a little bit lost lately. I've been jumping from game to game, been playing a bit of Armorer Forger, been playing a little bit of Fragpunk over the last couple of days, a little bit of Marvel Rivals, a bunch of single player games. I've been having a good time with all of them. There are a lot of good games right now. But I really want to have that kind of first-person shooter that I can drop into every day and know that I'm going to have a good time with. That's how I used to feel about Warzone and DMZ for a while. I haven't felt like that about Call of Duty for a few months now. So I'm hoping that Battlefield will be the thing to replace it, because I don't think there's that much hope for Call of Duty this year. So let's start off with what we know about the next Battlefield. It's set kind of in the present day. I've watched a bunch of this footage. I'm not going to talk in detail about the leaked footage because, you know, I don't really like talking about leaks and stuff like that here. But we know it's set in the present day. I haven't seen anything super futuristic in it. And so far it seems like it's set in kind of the Middle East. At least the map that we've seen is, and a little bit of footage that they showed off in that little teaser trailer when they announced the game. We also know that in lots of ways they're harking back to the days of Battlefield 3 and 4, so there's a bunch of features that are things that we've seen in previous Battlefield games, like when you're about to spawn on someone being able to see through their eyes. There seems to be something to do with the commander mode returning, and of course destruction, which is one of the more exciting things. But that's pretty much all we know. There's a lot of nitty-gritty details about like the weapons that are in there or the vehicles that are in there. But in terms of overall gameplay, we've only seen a very small slice. I think the test they did was like 2 hours on a single map. So we don't really know much about what the overall game is going to be like. So that's what I want to talk about in this video. What am I hoping for based on the stuff that we haven't seen yet? The first thing for me is more of a philosophy, and that's that I hope that they're focusing on entertaining experiences and narratives over competition. As far as I know, Battlefield has never been a really competitive game. I never hear people bragging about how great they are at Battlefield, and people at the end of matches don't seem to care that much about whether they've won or lost. I don't think there's any kind of tournament scene for it. So it doesn't matter too much if sometimes the game is a little bit unfair, if that makes for a better story. Like when you have a mode like Breakthrough, which I think has been confirmed that Breakthrough's coming back. When you have a mode like Breakthrough, I think it's fun if it's harder for one side. It makes it a little bit more dramatic. It forces them to think outside the box. And if they get beaten back and they can't survive, then that's fine. That's kind of what you expected. But those times when you do manage to find something that works and you do manage to get out, that makes it even more exciting. If they try to focus, like Call of Duty has done, on kind of competitive integrity and making everything fair and making sure everybody has a chance and that the best player always wins, I think then you have to make a load of choices that lose stuff like that. You know, maps have to start being a bit more symmetrical. They have to start being a little bit fairer. You're going to have less dead ends and things like that. Less things that feel a little bit overpowered. For me, one of the big differences between Battlefield and Call of Duty has always been that Battlefield has focused on that kind of experience. You know, the feeling of being in these cinematic Hollywood-style battlefields. It's not really real life. They're not trying to emulate that. It's much more about kind of the idea of what a battle could be in terms of how exciting it could be. And I think that's really what they should be focusing on. And that might mean things like, you know, the sound design, that maybe you could have things like jets flying overhead or helicopters that are absolutely deafening and make it very, very hard to hear things like footsteps or even commands and stuff like that. You could have effects like if a building collapses, it throwing loads of dust into the air that makes it incredibly hard to see, or even bogs down vehicles and stuff like that that get caught under the rubble. I really hope they double down on that kind of stuff, and I think we saw it a little bit with the older Battlefield games, you know, when they introduced Revolution or when Bad Company 2 had its destruction. It wasn't really about making the game more interesting in a competitive sense. It was more about leading to more of these cool Battlefield moments where something absolutely crazy happens, you know. You're sniping from a window and then suddenly you hear creaking and a whole building starts coming down and you've got to like run and escape from the rubble collapsing all around you. That's really cool. That's really exciting. And tied into that, I hope that idea kind of informs the map design, the map choices as well, rather than some idea about story or whatever. I don't know if I've ever really cared that much about the story in Battlefield. You know, Bad Company 2 was fine, but I never cared about it all that much. I'd much rather that they picked locations for maps based on what would be an interesting place for a battlefield. And I'm sure they'll do kind of some callbacks to maps that have been really popular in the past, and it'd be really cool to have some that are maybe a little bit more innovative, a little bit more interesting. You know, in Battlefield 2042, some of the maps look kind of nice, but they all do feel a bit like just an empty plain with then a couple of big buildings in the middle of them. When they added exposure to 2042, I think that was really cool because it was something a little bit different. You know, you had this higher plateau and then you had this massive kind of canyon and a valley down below. That was a lot more interesting than the tunnels going through. I really hope they do some more creative things like that. Now, going against a little bit of what I've just been saying, I also hope they add a few more nods to realism in. And by that I mean things like the way vehicles behave. One of my biggest problems with Battlefield 2042 when it first released and in the early technical tests was just that the vehicles aren't realistic at all. You know, they're not rolling at all, they're not skidding around really. All the ground vehicles feel very much like they're stuck to the ground, and the jets are obviously flying incredibly slowly, incredibly low, and just not looking at all like fighter jets do. In my personal opinion, I'd quite like it if they didn't have fighter jets in the game, or if they only had fighter jets in maps that are absolutely huge and have the jets incredibly fast. You know, you're not going to have them engaging each other miles away from each other where they can't even see each other like they do in real life, but at least have it so their sense of speed and power is held up in the game. It's very, very difficult for them to attack precise targets without some support from the ground. But if you want sort of a fast strike on a building or something like that, they should be absolutely terrifying. Maybe have things like Warthogs or AC-130s or something like that for that kind of close air support. Is that what it's called? Close air support? Where you've got troops on the ground and the planes actually kind of know what's going on and then they can interact with it. And obviously a focus on helicopters. I just think, like you can see in some of the footage here, the way jets move in Battlefield 2042 are really silly. And with all of the vehicles, I'd like them to start doing more interesting things with the damage. You know, if you damage the track or you damage the turret on a weapon, it shouldn't be something that anyone can just fix with a blowtorch. It should be something that causes a massive problem for that vehicle and again leads to cool moments. You know, trying to escape from a battlefield while your Jeep has lost a wheel, that's kind of interesting, that's kind of fun. It means it's more prone to like get stuck in the dirt and then flip over. Having stuff where like, oh okay, a jet loses a wing, but can it make it back to an airfield to try and sort of like get repaired or get a new one? That would be a little bit more interesting. So just having that kind of location damage on vehicles affecting them a little bit more. I think that's really cool from the point of view of steering the vehicles or flying the vehicles or whatever, but it's also kind of interesting when you're attacking vehicles if you're seeing the effect of your attacks. Like when I was playing Battlefield 2042 today, which is the footage that you're seeing, I really didn't like how when you're attacking vehicles, your only real sign that you'd done anything to the vehicle was that it would come up saying 20 damage or something like that. Like, that's not interesting. It doesn't feel immersive at all. It just kind of drags you out of the immersion and back into that mind space of, oh, this is a video game, these are the rules of the video game, I'm just trying to do the best I can with that. Which, that's kind of what I think, going back to what I said earlier, has ruined Call of Duty a little bit, that it's entirely focused on the game. It's not immersive at all. You don't have fun stories or anything like that. It's all about just competition and doing the best you can within the rules of the game. I'd really like it if Battlefield started having little nods to some kind of realism in terms of, okay, you can see your impact on the world without just having to look at something on the UI. Now, in terms of modes, obviously I'd like there to be Conquest and Breakthrough, and I think that's already been confirmed that those two modes are going to be there. I'm really hoping that they do a Battle Royale. I absolutely loved Battlefield 5's Firestorm. You can check out my video on the channel where we ran a community night on that a couple of weeks ago. That was really, really fun. It still holds up really well because Battlefield has this focus on immersion and kind of these spectacular moments. I think that makes Battle Royales much more interesting to me. Again, not a competitive player. I don't care too much about whether I'm winning or losing or whether I'm better than someone else or not. But I do like having sort of exciting moments and being able to go and do something with my friends that will be memorable at some point. You know, we're having these kind of cinematic, cool adventures within a Battle Royale. I think that's more interesting. And I think Battlefield is in a good position to do that. Now, obviously, if they do a Battle Royale, people are going to assume, oh, it has to be free to play. I assume it will have to be cross-play and like cross-progressional stuff like that. I'd be shocked if they didn't do that. But the free-to-play thing, I'm still a little bit kind of in two minds about, because with Call of Duty, one of the big problems has been cheating, and when people cheat and they get banned, they just make a new account, and because it's free to play, it's not difficult for them to do that at all. I think you could tie it to actual game accounts where people have to buy the game to get into it. And admittedly, you know, it means maybe the player population will be a bit lower, but if you have crossplay and stuff like that, it will still have some big advantages that Firestorm never had. And I think the positives of it being part of the premium product would probably outweigh the negatives. And as a part of that premium product, I know this is entirely wishful thinking and I won't do it, I think it would be quite nice if they just said, okay, for this game, for this Battlefield, it's a premium product, you pay for it, you're getting everything within that, you are not expected to be buying microtransactions, you're not buying cosmetics or anything like that. All of that's done from challenges in the game, and there's just like really solid progression in it, and you know, the camos and skins and whatever are kind of a bit more realistic. I think like Battlefield's been pretty good about that Battlefield does have slightly more realistic skins than maybe Call of Duty does, but I think that would be really cool if they kind of really drew a line in the sand and said, okay, we're not like Call of Duty and Fortnite and stuff like that. We're going to have stuff that's a bit more realistic, everything's earnable in-game, you don't need to pay extra for it. And then in terms of supporting in the future, maybe they go back to expansion passes and stuff like that. Maybe there's some kind of subscription down the line. I don't know how they could end up funding it and how they could end up monetizing it. But it'd be really interesting to see like one of these big titles move away from that whole free-to-play microtransaction-y model. I know they probably won't do that because, you know, games like Fortnite and Call of Duty make insane amounts of money, but this is just a list of stuff that I want, so I'm going to add it on there. I would like it to be a premium game, maybe even with a subscription for the, you know, Battle Royale part or whatever. If that then means that, you know, we get a complete game, we get something where everything once you're in the game is there for you to do, and that can kind of mean that you can have some cooler rewards from doing really interesting challenges and stuff like that. Okay, and then for the final thing, I'm going to go with something controversial because, you know, I love my hot takes that nobody else agrees with. The last thing I'd really like them to do is if they announce that the player counts for the games are going to be pretty low, you know, 32 on a side, something like that, but then there's a lot of bots in there. I think this is something that I've been arguing for with every big FPS game. I think it's a brilliant answer to lots of the problems we have. You know, it deals with the cheater problem because people aren't going to feel so bad if they're getting a load of kills. They're not going to feel like they have to resort to cheats. And I think that worked really well in games like, say, Titanfall, where you had like the normal soldiers, and they were obviously different from the pilots, but it meant anyone, someone who wasn't even very good at the game, was at least getting to get in some fights and win some fights just against the normal soldiers. I think that was really cool. It also means there's less players per game, so you're less likely to run into someone who's cheating. That means matchmaking can be better, so connections will be better because there's less players. So, you know, has to find less players to start a game. That means you can have a more strict matchmaking in terms of connection. You could even have skill-based matchmaking that works a lot better, so it's trying to find people to group you up against who are more similar to you. If there's less people, that works better, and then you can fill in the rest of the game to make it feel a bit more alive with a load of bots. And, you know, have the bots as kind of slightly more regular infantry, as if they're the new infantry, and the players that are slightly more elite infantry, they're the ones who have slightly cooler, more interesting toys, more interesting weapons and vehicles and stuff like that. Maybe even have it so each squad of players has another squad of bots that they can tell to go guard an objective or go attack something with them or get them supplies or something like that. I think that would be really interesting, and while, you know, bots like in 2042 tend to be pretty dumb, they tend not to be that interesting to fight against, surely that technology's improved. With AI and machine learning and all of this kind of stuff, surely we can start getting some bots that are a little bit more interesting to fight against. And I don't want them to be like running around killing players all the time or anything like that. It's more about adding to the immersion and adding to the feeling like you're on a big, large, active battlefield, without that meaning that you've got to have like 120 players, all of which could potentially have terrible connections or be cheating or be playing in some stupid, annoying way. If you limit the number of players and increase the number of AI, I think it's much easier to kind of control that experience and make it something interesting. Going back to Titanfall's attrition mode, I think just worked perfectly for this. That, you know, at the beginning of a game of Titanfall, you would see your troops rushing out on their own helicopters and stuff. You were the pilots, and you know, the other troops, when they saw you, would be like, oh my god, it's a pilot. You're the pilots, you know you're better than them, but you do need to keep an eye on them. You know, they're running around objectives and stuff like that. You can take them out as you're doing other stuff, but when you see a player, the players look a little bit different, the players move differently. You need to sort of like pay particular attention to them while sort of dealing with the other troops in the background. I think that's really, really cool. It just helps all players, like even newer players, get to grips with the game and have something they can do that's kind of useful in some way, like dealing with the enemy AI. And then it means that the sort of like better players, the players who are really, really good, they can kind of ignore that and focus on the enemy players, and they've got something interesting too. It's like a win-win for everyone. I've got no idea why people are so against the idea of home bots in games. Also, while I remember it, I was talking about skill-based matchmaking. Obviously, I would kind of prefer it if we had server browsers again. I think, you know, playing Arma Reforger lately has reminded me just how good server browsers are, and the ability for people to host their own servers and have private servers where, you know, you can have whitelists and stuff like that. You can have slightly custom rule sets, custom playlists and things like that. I really hope that that comes in Battlefield 2. Anyway, thank you for listening to me talk about all the stuff that I'm hoping for. Maybe even we have some developers from Battlefield or EA or something like that. I would love to chat to someone who's working on this game and just do sort of a nice positive interview, but just sort of chat to someone and be like, hey, so what is the philosophy behind this game in terms of, you know, immersion versus competitive integrity and all of that stuff? I'd be super fascinated. If you have your own thoughts on the game about what sort of stuff that you'd like to see in it, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one. Goodbye!